Hello, Dr. Kevin Connors. This is session 6, a new look for cancer. We're talking about how a person does ends up developing cancer in their body and how what systems are present in a person's body to keep a person from getting cancer. So we talked about some suppressor genes quite briefly last time. Now we could put those into a category of suppressor systems. So when we're talking about suppressor again, we're suppressing cancer. So we're suppressing the growth and rapid replication of cells. So out of the suppressor systems, we have to talk about normal programmed cell death because that is your number one way, and really how all of your suppressor genes work is to stimulate apoptosis. So apoptosis, remember, is the word we use for normal programmed cell death. Why isn't the cell dying? We're going to talk next week about receptor site abnormalities. This is orange around this rectangular picture here is the cell membrane. On the cell membrane, these little grayish things are different receptors for different that will stimulate different pathways. And inside the cell, all this little gobbledygook of all these technical abbreviations have to do with different inside the cell intracellular pathways. It's very complicated. So these intracellular pathways are what we're concerned with cancer. Now you see down at the bottom left that squashed circle that says apoptosis. Apoptosis is a process in the cell that happens within the cell cytoplasm of all these different pathways. So a number of these different pathways lead to, you can see some of them go down to and lead to apoptosis. That's what causes cell death. Now if there's a blockage, think of that. If there's some sort of blockage in any one of those pathways, it can block the process of apoptosis. So there's a blockage because of we talk about cancer causes. If there's a virus, if there's a toxicity, if somebody has a heavy metal toxicity, if somebody has some sort of bacterial infection. So how does H. pylori work in causing cancer? It's the number one cause of stomach cancer worldwide. How does H. pylori, a bacteria, cause cancer? Is it because the H. pylori is grown out of control? Well, not really. So H. pylori causes cancer two ways. H. pylori is a gram-negative bacteria that can get inside the cell. Getting anything that's going to get inside the cell that is a foreign invader could disrupt intracellular pathways, of many different type of intracellular pathways. If H. pylori gets inside the cell and mainly affects the mitochondria, you are going to have a decrease in energy production, and this person is just going to have fatigue. Many of the viruses actually do that. They decrease energy production in the cell, and the person ends up with just chronic fatigue. Epstein-Barr is an example of that. So, but one of the things that H. pylori does is it gets inside the cell and it blocks these apoptotic pathways. So if a person is going to get cancer, remember the first thing that has to take place is a broken apoptotic pathway. Another thing that the H. pylori does is it attaches to an apoptotic receptors. So it can actually take the place of another apoptotic stimulator on that cell membrane. So where the cell membrane has a receptor that is considered an apoptotic receptor, meaning that vitamin D is supposed to attach to that receptor, be the key that turns that lock mechanism, that protein in that membrane wall, to start this activation process that leads to apoptosis. Now the key can't get in that mechanism. So the key can't get in the lock because H. pylori is stuck there. When we talk about receptor systems next week, you're going to see that that is really what is going on with estrogen dominant cancers. So breast cancer that is HER2 positive has to do with an inability for the ADOL receptor to be stimulated, which is an apoptotic receptor. So if there's a blockage on the receptor membrane, the cell membrane, the receptor, if there's a blockage or a breakdown in the intracellular signaling, then apoptosis doesn't take place and we have a problem. Inside the cell of this picture, there's another rectangular structure that has a red membrane around it. That is supposed to depict the nucleus. And in the nucleus is where you have gene regulation. That's where the DNA is. And that's where you have cellular proliferation. That's where you have a rapid replication taking place with a cancer. You can see all the different processes that lead into that affect gene regulation, that affect the DNA. If any of those pathways are broken by the same thing, let's use H. pylori, then it can lead to not only a failure of apoptosis, but now also a failure in normal replication. And instead of that cell replicating every 12 weeks, it's replicating once every 3 days. And then that cell is replicating another cell with that same break in that pathway. So that's what cancer is. So let's say it was started by H. pylori. It broke somewhere in the apoptotic pathway, and it broke the stimulation of normal gene proliferation. So now your genes are duplicating. Your cell is replicating every 3 days instead of every 12 weeks. That's by definition what cancer is. So the suppressor system that we're talking about is really apoptosis. It's really essential. So even if I have a broken replication pathway, so the cell is going to replicate faster, if I have a healthy apoptotic pathway, it's going to die. The cell will die. So we're not even talking about the immune system's help here. This is just a normal process that's supposed to take place whenever the cell is injured, when the cell is aged. There's a bunch of different signaling mechanisms that signal apoptosis. There can be a signal from inside the cell, and there can be a signal from outside the cell. So apoptosis plays this important role in normal development in homeostasis. This is what keeps us healthy. If we didn't have apoptosis taking place, our bodies would just get bigger and bigger and bigger as we replicate cells. Our liver would explode out of our gut. Well, our gut would be exploding, we would be getting larger. So that just doesn't work that way. So as a cell replicates, the mother cell eventually dies. It's activated by two things, I said, something that's going on inside the cell and a receptor point from the outside of the cell. So this is where things can get broken. So things can get broken inside the cell, or things can get broken at the receptor membrane. Cancer often is really initiated by DNA damage, and should technically, because of the DNA damage, should then through the intrinsic apoptotic process should stimulate apoptosis. And that's where the tumor suppressor genes really come in. The p53 is an intracellular messenger and should signal apoptosis if replication is starting to take place. So if there's a damage in the DNA telomere, which is going to signal rapid replication, it should stimulate p53 to stimulate apoptosis. So this is where a deficiency in p53 can lead to cancer. So we'll go back to last week's presentation. If this person is being exposed to a lot of chemicals, is not being exposed to cruciferous vegetables, you are setting yourself up for cancer, you could say. Well, there's lots of different factors that have to take place in order for someone to get sick, and many different factors that have to take place in order for someone to completely express cancer. So we don't want to pin it on one thing, but we do want to look at lifestyle changes. That's why it's important, whether you're trying to recover from disease or trying to prevent disease, to look at the big picture. It's not so much just giving this person chemotherapy. It's going to kill all the cancer and they can continue to live their lifestyle. That is my gripe about even professing for an oncologist to do chemotherapy and surgery and say we removed the bulk of the tumor and their PET scan is clean, that they are cancer-free and they've won the battle. There's a real danger there because the truth is we're never cancer-free. And if you've ever had a diagnosis of cancer, you've got thousands, maybe millions of circulating tumor cells that are just waiting to metastasize. So if you go back to the lifestyle that brought you to where you were, the chance of you ending up 2 to 5 years later with full metastasis is very possible. So we have to change the milieu. We have to change the foundation of the cell environment, which if any cancer therapy doesn't look at dietary changes and lifestyle changes, you've completely missed the boat. I cannot tell you how many patients have come to me and told me that their oncologist said that diet had nothing to do with their cancer, and that was just a fallacy. It's just, the ignorance is mind-boggling that's out there. To think that you could just use chemicals to destroy cancer and then you're going to never get it again is just ridiculous. So, normal process is apoptosis. It's an essential process for life in general. Normal cells undergo apoptosis in response to stress-inducing events in the cell, any DNA damage, and dysregulation or a break in that apoptotic cycle is critical for cancer development. It is the first step that really takes place usually. So there's an intrinsic, there's an extrinsic pathway. And we're going to talk about, spoke a little bit about P53, but we're going to talk about other things that activate this. I won't get too deep into that. So resisting these are the hallmarks of cancer, you could say. Resisting cell death is really usually the first thing. It's not always the first thing that takes place, but it has to be the next thing that takes place after DNA damage. So we're going to walk through all of these little steps here in the next coming things here. So I hope you're learning something from this. I'm trying to keep them brief, but they're going about 15 minutes, so I apologize. So, all right, if this was helpful and you need to listen to it again, go ahead and do that. Otherwise, I will see you next week.